Welcome, Ash.
Thank you.
I'm really, really pleased to have you on. And we were just chatting before going live about all the things about screen time. I have been following you for, I don't know, a little while, but as soon as I did, I think I sent it to a few parent friends, shared some stuff on my Instagram, and I just love your approach to screen time and video games and kids and their behavior and big emotions that sometimes come. So I am very grateful for your time and for you saying yes to come on.
Oh, of course. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I know you're a wealth of knowledge in this area. I want to introduce you to everyone who's watching in Let's Raise Emotionally Intelligent Kids, or if you're watching a bit later on YouTube, you may not know about Ash, but let me do the introduction and we'll talk about what we're going to be talking about. We often worry, I think, as parents, when our kids, I've got two kids, when they want to play video games, some of us really worry that our child's going to get addicted, that it's bad for them, that it's going to have these negative outcomes. It's going to stop them wanting to do other things. So there's all these concerns and things. And I guess, like, you know, our parents, or my parents, didn't have to. I had a Game Boy, but they didn't really have to like deal with the abundance of fun, interesting, attention-grabbing games and stuff. So I get that we're in a bit of a new era with this stuff. Anyway, so you know, we know that screens are becoming an increasingly common part of our lives, and we can actually help our kids. Ash is going to talk today with us about, you know, managing screen time and video games and those interactions, balancing like boundaries and things like that, balancing screen time and things with other responsibilities and other activities. And I think that's, I guess, what most of us want as parents, to have a nice balance and not to like ban our kids. Do you ever find that parents are like, no, we need to ban our kids, or is probably not right?
From games, like outright?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do hear it. Yeah, I think I have a fear of like it's easier to just withhold completely because it's like a Pandora's box feeling. If we allow it at all, then we can never go back, right? So yes, I do think that happens.
True. It's a slippery slope for some, I think. Okay, so let me introduce you guys to Ash. EDS, I knew I was going to say that wrong. EDS, so educational specialist, and a middle school teacher in Colorado, hence why you're all rugged up and I'm like sweating. And since 2016, Ash has spoken across the country in the US about how to make classrooms and academic spaces, how they can sort of mimic game structures to make learning compelling, motivating, and engaging, which is bloody, like, that's what we want our classrooms and our learning spaces to be. So I'm so on board with how can we get our kids to more engage and love school and not hate school. Anyway, Ash believes video games, specifically entertainment games, can help us create better teaching, more engaging learning, and motivated lifelong learners. So my brain goes when I hear that. And in 2021, Ash pivoted their gaming and educational content onto Instagram. You guys may already know and may follow the Gamer Educator. If you don't, please jump on over to Instagram and follow Ash on there. I'm forever like screenshotting and saving and sharing their stuff. And they help to guide families to have relationships with screens and video games that actually benefits everyone in the family. Like, it can be done, right? So as well as teaching and gaming, Ash loves baking. Me too. Hiking and going to car shows with their child. So like I said, continue to work on the Gamer Educator over on Instagram. And are you finding that people are just like loving the stuff that you're putting there?
Yeah, my 2-year Instagram anniversary is like next week or something. And yeah, like it's been quite a 2 years, you know? Even the last few months have been really like a lot of growth in that community. And it's always, you know, I didn't really think that my stance wasn't unique in any way until I realized that I didn't hear a lot of people speaking about it the same way that I was. And when I first came into Instagram a couple of years ago, it was really out of necessity because I was used to being at conferences and conventions. And then in the pandemic, I thought, well, that's not going to happen. So I need to try something else. And I really was not expecting the kind of audience that I found. And I was surprised by how many parents were just kind of thinking, I need guidance and I need help. And I think, you know, parents, we don't want to screw our kids up. I completely empathize with that. You know, so much of parenting is just, I don't want to screw up. And this is, I think, an area that a lot of parents just don't feel prepared for. And as you alluded to, sometimes the advice is just don't. And we often realize that when real life happens, that's just not that practical anymore. And that's just not that possible for a lot of families. And so there's just kind of a lack of something in the middle there that I think I'm kind of filling.
You know what? I remember sharing a post on the Facebook group maybe 4 weeks ago. It was a little while ago now. And it was essentially about, you know, we've got to let go of the idea of trying to unplug our kids from games and screens and stuff. And there was a bit more to it. But man, like, it wasn't my post, but I shared it. And I kind of copped a lot of heat from parents who, like, I get that, you know, we don't want kids glued to screens all the time. But yeah, that really got a lot of parents kind of upset over the concept of they're here to stay. And like you said, you know, the middle ground, like there is a space where we can have some boundaries and then allow our kids like some freedom, but with limits. Like, does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And the way I view it is that it's also, we're preparing them to hopefully manage those things responsibly in the way that we ultimately want. You know, if someone decides we're going to have no screens or no video games, I mean, it's valid to make that choice for your family. I'm not going to tell someone not to make that choice. If it's working and it's okay for your family, then great. But the back of my mind always thinks, what is the end goal? You know, eventually, what is going to happen? Because the reality is we live in a digital world. We communicate digitally. More and more of our lives are trending that way. Education trends that way. Jobs trend that way. And, you know, eventually our kids are going to be kind of thrust into a really digitally centered world. And if we withhold access to screens and games and whatever else, then we're kind of putting that responsibility of management on our future kids. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of hoping that they will just kind of organically have those management skills. And some kids very well may, but as many of us know, when we are trying to help our kids through these things, it's hard enough when they're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If they don't have that practice of managing these things when we are there to help them, how will they be successful if we wait and they have to manage it when we're not there to help them?
This like just it's aligned so perfectly with emotional intelligence. And I know you talk about emotions and behavior, and we can touch on that, but it's the same with anything with parenting. Whilst we have the ability to lovingly influence our kids and their choices, then I think it's our responsibility to make the most of that and guide them with, you know, how to deal with emotions, or how to deal with when they want, you know, many hours on screens, and we need to reduce that kind of thing. So we're on the exact same page. I
also find that so often, one of the things that people bring up a lot is that the emotions that come up with video games often feel so much more heightened, or can come up like very suddenly. You know, a child will seem completely fine, and then it's like this sort of 180, and they're suddenly really dysregulated or exhibit behaviors that they don't exhibit in other kinds of activities. And so we sometimes see that and think, well, it's because of the game. It's because of the screen. It's because of the tablet or whatever. And that may be triggering it, but it really is the same kind of emotional regulation or dysregulation that can come up in anything. and it might just be more heightened when it's coming up in video games. And sometimes when we experience that, we might think, well, we should avoid this. They get so upset when they're playing video games, so we just shouldn't have video games. But if we kind of accept that this is something that's making them upset, and we accept that with the sort of same validity as if they were upset over, someone taking their toy, right? Something very real, then we just view it as something to help them manage. And when we manage it that way, we're also sending them the message of, this is something that I can help you manage so that you can manage this yourself one day. And once again, it kind of all blends together so that hopefully someday in the future, if they're playing whatever the newest PlayStation is in their dorm room and they get upset, that they have those skills because we've not kind of segregated the emotions that happen with games as being separate or different from the emotions that happen with other things.
Oh, that makes so much sense, because it doesn't, it's like the losing that game or not making it to the next level or whatever it is. That's just the stimulus. What's the word for that? Like, that's just the thing, the trigger that's getting my child so upset, so mad, or so disappointed. Like, those emotions happen in all different other day-to-day, like you said, losing a toy, or their sibling eats the last cookie, or that kind of thing. Separating, that's powerful for me to go, because my oldest, my son, tends to play more games. Separating the screen and the games and the, like, not demonizing and focusing on that, but how can I help my child to deal with those emotions? Because we all, even as an adult, I get really disappointed about stuff. It might not be a game, but it's something else, and that's valid. So
Absolutely.
Golden nugget. Thank you. Golden nugget. I'm gonna write that down. So,
and sometimes I'm sorry.
Go.
One thing that also is kind of a byproduct of games is that because they are so engrossing, sometimes what we don't see are some of those like tells of behavior or dysregulation that we might notice a lot earlier with other things. If a kid is coloring and they can't be in the line, then so they're frustrated, right? They might say something, they might move, we might see their body start getting wiggly, right? And we know our kids, and those are all these tells. Well, one thing about video games is that they are really engrossing. And so our kids might not give us those tells, or they might be really different. Like, my child's sort of dysregulation tells in video games are completely different from what they are in other parts of their life. And I only figured this out by kind of just studying them and figuring it out, just like I had to figure out how they're getting dysregulated, if we're at the park for too long or something. But I think when it's a little harder to tell that, it also compounds it and makes it a little bit more difficult for families. And then we think, well, it's just this like hair trigger thing. And it really just might be that it's more internal, or that it's maybe presenting a little bit differently. And when we kind of view it as this other aspect of emotion to help them navigate, and just kind of view it as data, as information, for me at least, it kind of takes the emotion out of it for me as the parent, and takes some of that weight out of it, and makes it a little easier for me to just focus solely on the emotion or the behavior that I'm seeing.
Yeah, wow. And so can you tell us a little bit of, that when I learned, when I was listening to the podcast, see, my brain is going too fast. I'm excited about the research. And in particular, I think there was one, Ferguson, that you quoted, doing these huge meta-analyses. So looking at lots of different studies and the results of those over periods of time, pulling them together. I always say, like, yes, we might have our opinions and stuff, but we need to really listen to what the research is saying. Can you shed some light on just maybe some big chunks, or some things that you think really will stick out for parents?
What can be tricky when we're looking at data in the area of video games is that for a long time, there was a real dearth, a lack of research in this area. And the few things that did exist, pardon me, I'm getting over a cold, they were studies that tried to show an association between playing video games and negative outcomes, particularly like aggressive behavior. And these were some of the earliest studies, so they became the most often cited studies. And even now they're still cited. Like, they just they're very ubiquitous, and we're still feeling the impacts of them, I think, because they became so frequently cited, and that a lot of other research kind of became built upon it. And since that time, a lot of those foundational studies have been shown to have suffered from bias that affected their results and actually made their results seem significant, but they really weren't significant. And if we really dig in, if you really look at the nitty-gritty of those studies, often what they're doing in a lab to try to prove aggression really is not, I think, what most people would think of as like actually aggressive behavior. But those things kind of made their way into public consciousness and kind of took over. And in the interview I did with Adam Grant that you were listening to, he mentioned this very large meta-analysis done by Christopher Ferguson, who's a big researcher in this area, and looked at, I think, over 100 studies that affected over 100,000 kids. And they found, kind of studying the studies, found that there are no significant links between video games and violent behavior, aggression, negative behavior, negative mental health outcomes. And we actually have a pretty vast amount of research that actually shows the opposite, that it can often be associated with higher self-worth, with lower rates of suicide ideation, with lower rates of aggression, which is often the opposite of what people think. But if you think about why someone might play a video game, if they're feeling upset, if they've had a bad day, if they are feeling angry, they might choose to play a video game to blow off that steam, right? To decompress. So one of the studies I mentioned in that interview was a Barnett study from about 10 years ago that found that when players play violent games, in this particular study, that they have lower levels of aggression when they're done, not higher. So the research does show generally like neutral or positive outcomes for games. And I often experience that just sharing that with people is not always enough, because we often come in with these preconceived ideas or some negative associations, either from our own upbringings or our own experiences. So data can help with that, but sometimes it's not enough. And so my other message that I sometimes try to share with people is it's okay to do things we like solely because we enjoy them. And I think that's a big reason why video games really, if we really examine why is it that we are always putting them last. Sometimes people will say, well, I'm okay with them so long as they've done their homework and chores and weeded the garden and, power wash the garage. It's like every possible thing we can think of, right? And then they're like, and then you can play games. And what we really mean is when you've done every other thing I can think of that has more value, then you can do this thing, which doesn't have value to me, right, as the adult. And kids pick up on that. Like, kids are smart, and they pick up on that message of, okay, like does my adult see the value in this the same way I do? So I think data is really important to talk about. And I think it's only part of the puzzle when we're really thinking about kind of our public view of video games as leisure.
That's a huge point. I actually remember writing that one down in my notes when I was listening to that interview. I had written, I've got them in front of me. Ash says it's okay to do things just because you like them, ! Because we often think that leisure isn't right unless we're learning something. And I think you mentioned knitting or knitting game. Or maybe
yeah, I mean, I use it as an example because, I love to bake, right? And people might say like, oh, and I often bring it into work, right? So my coworkers will say like, oh, it's so great. Like, cause then we get stuff too, and it's, oh, you're learning a skill, you're making something for other people. Or I like to hike, and people would say, oh, that's good. It's good for you, right? But ultimately I do those things because I enjoy them. I don't want to do those things because they are being like cast as better than something else. I want to do them because I like them. And that's also why I play video games, because I like them. And it makes me feel those same things. If I need to decompress, if I want to kind of just do something, set my eye on something as a goal and then not have to think so much. Baking does that because I follow a recipe. Hiking does that because I follow a hiking trail. And video games do that too, because they tell me, hey, go defeat this boss. And then I go do it, right? They're all doing the same thing psychologically, but we would look at two of those things and say, oh, that's a great use of your time. And we'd look at another thing, and we are more likely to say, that's a waste of your time. But I'm doing the same, I'm accomplishing the same feelings through them.
This is a whole new way of looking at video games, I think. Something else I had written down. I didn't mean to just like read off my notes, but because I remembered and I put them up, and now there's so many good points. You speak about things like, games or video games can give kids and adults a sense of autonomy, so that sense of control, which, man, I speak about the sense of agency that kids, like this biological drive that they have that is just wired within them. The sense of competence, like I can do this and I beat it or I achieved it, that sense of, achieving or mastery, and relatedness. Can you go through those? And also the last one, relatedness, and share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this is a concept from psychology called self-determination theory. And the idea of this is that there are three factors that contribute to intrinsic motivation. And this is one of the reasons that I started talking about video games in education, because we talk about intrinsic motivation as the goal of education all the time, that we want kids to want to learn for learning's sake. But when video games do this, we look down on them. We say like, oh, if only they wanted to play the cello or go to school as much as they want to play video games. And my point was, well, why don't we look at what's going on psychologically that's compelling them to do that? Because the reality is it's not just all graphics or sex appeal or flashy costumes. Not every person likes to play every video game, right? There's thousands of video games. So these psychological structures are a huge part of it. So as you already mentioned, I think you summed them up really well. Autonomy is really a sense of control. And people are different in how they sense that control. Like I already mentioned, I feel control when I'm actually being told what to do, which sounds backward, but it's like, I don't like being given too much freedom. And as an adult who also is a parent, like I get to the end of my day and I'm like, I'm tired of deciding what to do. I've told other people what to do all day long. I don't want to figure out what to do anymore. So, I bake from a recipe and I'm like, oh, great. I just put these things in the bowl and then I get something great. And I play video games that are the same way. Okay, it tells me to do this. I'm going to go do this. So that gives me a sense of control. Kids often are not given a lot of sense of control in their day. We feel like they are. We feel like the kids are the center of our lives. But from the kid perspective, especially if they're in school, they have listening fatigue all day long. They're being told what to do. They don't really get a sense of control. So a lot of kids like a lot of open world games, things like Minecraft, because they can do whatever they want, right? There is no wrong. They get to decide what to do. That's a really empowering feeling. So that sense of autonomy and control, huge motivator. Competence, as you already mentioned, that feeling of success. And then relatedness is, our ability to feel related to other people. And this, again, looks really different. Some kids want to play highly social games where they're, actively playing with other people who are their friends in real life or other people in the world. Or it could be, they're playing together with someone on the couch. But I also feel like you can even relate to people kind of asynchronously, like, oh, we play the same game and we talk about it. Right? I do that with my students sometimes, and I still feel that relatedness with them. And it can even sometimes come through competition, right? Like I cannot be better or the best unless it is in comparison to someone else. So sometimes that feeling of competition can bring in that relatedness as well. So when we feel these things, we feel intrinsic motivation to keep doing those things. And that's not unique to video games, but video games find ways of building in opportunities for those things to make players feel motivated to continue playing. And we notice that success often when we try to get them to stop playing, but really we could learn a lot from them by thinking, okay, what is it that my child is getting from this? Are they playing a game where it's really open-ended and they're seeking that sense of control? A kid who loves to just build things in Minecraft, they might really love to build with a bucket of Lego. They might really love to draw things from their imagination. They might like to go outside and craft things that they find in nature. There's ways of kind of finding analogs or pivots out of these gaming interests. And when we view that gaming interest as valid, we can kind of look at it inquisitively and figure out, okay, what is it they're seeking? How can I give that to them in a different way?
Ooh, I really like that one. I wanna like type it down. That was another like number 5 nugget. I love everything you have been sharing that you share on your Instagram. Before we finish up, there was one thing that stuck in my mind that I want to still ask you. But first, can we talk a bit about maybe having some boundaries around screens, game time, and things like that? If parents are watching this thinking, oh, I don't know how to set boundaries, or it's hard for me, or I get pushback and emotion, or I get, I'm not confident, what would your advice or some tips be?
Well, I do really recommend to families that video games be a consistent part of a routine. And that's because when things are routine, they become not a very big deal. And that doesn't mean you're having video games every day, right? It just means whatever you decide is an appropriate amount or an appropriate number of days per week, that it is consistent. You know, for us, video games are always right before dinner, because that way I know one of us, my spouse or myself, can be making dinner, right? It's serving a purpose for all of us. And that makes it really sustainable for us. And then my child also knows that they know exactly when it's going to fall on the day. And because I have a younger kid who doesn't really tell time, it also helps them because they're relating it to other chunks of the day. You know, boundaries are they're a constant thing that we're always having to navigate one way or the other. There are actually a lot of ways that we can use video games themselves to kind of help with those boundaries. So if our kids are playing a game that has, you know, an actual sense of time built in, like a timer, then we can set it for an appropriate time. If they're playing a game that's maybe based on races or levels, we can say you have time for one more race. A phrase I love to use all the time is, what will your last thing be? You know, I'll say like, oh, you have 3 minutes. What is the last thing you're going to do today? And that just kind of gives my child like an off ramp of like, okay, I've got to pick my last thing. And like my child loves to just race cars around randomly. And their thing is that they have to park the car. I don't know why. Like they'll be driving in the middle of a field and they'll be like, well, let me park. I'm like, all right. So, you know, and I would have never thought to say that, but I've now figured it out because I have often said, okay, you have 3 minutes, like choose your last thing. And they know from experience that we mean that when we say it. And that has required a lot of boundary holding of us saying, it's time to turn the controller off. And if you don't turn it off, I'll turn it off for you. And they are not going to like that. And they also don't like it when we say it's time to leave the playground, you can walk or I can carry you. And when they throw a tantrum and we carry them screaming to the car, we don't never take them to playgrounds again, right? We take them to playgrounds again and we practice the skill and we think about what we can do differently. And it really is not different with video games. We can build in those boundaries and we can stick to them. And eventually, they become part of our routine too.
Wow, that has just stuck with me. We don't never take them to playgrounds again. We don't never give them an ice cream again or this or that. Like we stay consistent and we see the long-term end goal and we know that there's value in that. Oh my gosh, we could talk for hours. I think.
Yeah, it went fast.
What was the last thing I was going to ask you? I remember a little bit of the research mentioned in that interview recently was that countries with the highest gaming populations like Japan and South Korea have the lowest rates of gun violence. What? Like that?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep, I know. We get I mean, you're not in America. I am, so I'm very like, you know, focused on us, but we in America, we get very myopic and we often kind of pretend that that somehow our culture of video games is like unique to us. So then when we have like yet another mass shooting, which happens all the time here, unfortunately, then we're often like relating those two, forgetting that the rest of the world exists. So yeah, Japan and South Korea, they have the lowest gun violent rates in the world per 100,000 people, respectively. Japan is 0.06 per 100,000 people. South Korea is 0.08 per 100,000 people. And they have the highest rates of the percent of the population who plays video games. And America has, I mean, we're toward the top of who plays video games. We're like pretty high, but we have orders of magnitude higher rates of gun violence. Our rate of gun violence is 12.21 per 100,000 people. So it just doesn't even compare. And we forget a lot of the most successful video games in the world are made not in America. They're made in Japan. They're made elsewhere in the world. And we don't see those trends happening elsewhere in the world. So
that's fascinating. I think everything that you've shared today, and more, I'm sure, on your Instagram, this stuff just makes us go, oh, okay, let me look into that. Or, you're providing the research or translating it, so I just, I want to say a huge thank you.
Absolutely. I'm just glad that I can help. And this process is not easy, choosing to introduce these things and manage these things. It's not easy. I wish there was a magic bullet. I wish there was an easy button. And for so many aspects of parenting, there is not. But what I really do try to emphasize on my Instagram page at The Gamer Educator is that screens should benefit everyone in a family. We get very focused on just our kids. Everyone should be able to benefit from screens. Screens should help other people get their needs met. It's okay if a screen helps you get your needs met. If it's filling in for a gap that should be filled with another support, that's not your fault, right? And so we often use screens in that way. And I think bringing that lens into is really important. Is something that I talk about there a lot as well. So everything we talked about and more lives somewhere on my Instagram. So if people have not been there, I hope you'll join us there, join me there. And I'm always happy to help and point you in a direction if you're needing some guidance.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think the big things that I took away, we want to value doing things because we love them for ourselves, but allowing that in our kids as well. The consistent boundaries and working out, like planning and thinking, reflecting with your partner or spouse about what they are. I wrote down what will your last thing be? What's the last thing you're going to do before finish? And we never don't take kids to the playground again. I don't.
That's very awkward phrasing. I think I have posted about that before, and I think I said, when our child throws a tantrum leaving the playground, we don't blame playgrounds.
Yes, there we go.
Which is very similar idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Ash. I really, really appreciate it. And
thank you so much.
You're welcome. As we said, please jump on over to Instagram, The Gamer Educator. I know I've probably got a super Aussie accent. Can you say The Gamer Educator in an
No, you said The Gamer Educator. It's awkward. I have to always over enunciate the R.
You want to say an Aussie accent for me? Can you do it? Or
oh, say it in Aussie. Okay, the only thing I've been watching, I watched Heartbreak High, the reboot of Heartbreak High. It's on Netflix. Yeah. And I got like so hearing their accents that one day in the car, I just kept saying "nar" over and over again. Is like someone typed it out to me as like, no, it's like NAR. And I said it out loud and I was like, oh. And I know that's a very stereotypical, incredibly obnoxious thing, but yeah, no, I can't do anything else. I've tried to say pie with an Australian accent and my spouse just like can't even handle it. Says I'm doing it very wrong.
I love that. Thank you so much, Ash. I'm going to put this in the Facebook feed and on YouTube so people can go on over and learn from you and watch your stuff. So thank you again and have a great evening, because I know it's evening time there.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you. See you guys. Have a good evening, day, night, morning, wherever you are. Bye.